So I drove.
All right.
Went back.
Well, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Thank you for being here. We are recording this today, just so you know, but it's just for our congregation, for anybody who missed it. But yeah, I'm just here to introduce April and Alex Norton, who are our special guests today. April works for Teton County Jackson Housing Department, and Alex worked with the Teton County and Town of Jackson long-range planning and in the planning department. So anyway, they're here to give us kind of a big picture of what's going on in Teton County and kind of in the pipeline, maybe a little bit of history too, and challenges, opportunities, and then also how our employee housing project, Homestead, kind of fits into the larger picture. So why don't I begin with a word of prayer. God, thank you for this day that you've made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. And thank you for April and Alex and just the community servants that they have been and are and continue to be. And Lord, we pray over this conversation today that you would give us insight into how your Spirit's leading in this town and through our project to address the housing challenges. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. And also, April and Alex, they attend PCGH, so welcome. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. April. I'm April. He's Alex. Alex and I are going to sort of tag team this presentation. He is going to talk first about kind of demographics of Teton County, how those have changed over time. He's going to talk to you all about the comprehensive plan, which is our overall sort of guiding policy document around land use and planning in the Valley, before we jump into the specifics around housing. Alice and I met working on the 2012 comprehensive plan, so it's my favorite. With that, I think, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah. You have a thing.
I have a thing.
Okay.
Is it working? Yeah, it's working. Okay. Hi, I'm Alex. So I'm just going to go through some kind of high level how the community has grown and changed, and then turn it over to April to talk more about some of the specifics regarding housing, and we'll leave ample time to answer any questions you have on specifics, since this will be a fairly high level tour through kind of history and planning in the community. So as April mentioned, we have a comprehensive plan and a workforce housing action plan that she works from on a day-to-day basis. But looking back at the history of how we got here, this is just kind of a brief comparison of where buildings are here on the left, conservation easements and traffic, and how they've evolved since 1970. The 70s and 90s were really our two biggest periods of growth. This chart shows the amount of population growth year by year, and you can see kind of our initial boom in the 1970s, followed by a decline in the late 80s, and then a really large period of boom in the 90s, leading into today where we're actually starting to see a population plateau. That 1970s growth was really driven by an in-migration of the baby boom generation as the community grew and sort of matured into the community we have now. You'll notice we had a population of just under 5,000 in 1970, and that's jumped to almost 24,000 today. That second period of growth in the 90s really had two components to it. First was the second wave of in-migration, kind of that next generation, Generation X, moving into the Valley, coupled with the baby boomers having children. Myself. So some natural population growth to go with in-migration, And that really, the 1990s really was our peak of population growth. In terms of planning, the first comprehensive plan we had in the community was in 1978 in response to kind of that first wave of in-migration, realization that we were growing as a community and needed to manage that growth. That plan was really focused on trying to get a hold on subdivisions that were happening in the county. And so it was really focused on a minimum lot size to accommodate really groundwater and septic concerns, and really focused on subdivisions in Teton County. In response to that second wave of growth that was ramping up in the 90s, there was a comprehensive plan in 1994. That comprehensive plan was the first plan that introduced sort of housing goals and the housing program. It was the first plan that introduced wildlife protections and the natural resources overlay. A lot of tools and policies that are still in place today and are really still fairly cutting edge for rural resort communities across the country. Whether it's the NRO or the housing program, policies that really speak to the natural resource and community ethic of our community were really first introduced in 1994. In 2012, that 1994 plan was updated or replaced by the 2012 comprehensive plan. The 2012 comprehensive plan really focuses on this idea of location and type of growth, location, amount, and type of growth. The idea being if we can build housing in the right place for the workforce, we can both protect natural resources and provide for the future of our communities, socially, economically, and in terms of community spirit. The 2012 comprehensive plan has an adaptive management mechanism in it, which means that once we hit certain amount of growth, 7%, every time we grow 7% in terms of the number of dwelling units in the community, we look at the plan again and look at what needs updated, what needs changing, what's working well and can stay the same. The first adaptive management update was in 2020, and so we went in and made some site changes to the comprehensive plan. We identified some additional areas for growth. That's where the Northern South Park project was kind of first identified as a potential need, and that planning got kicked off. And as we sit today in 2025, we're on the precipice of kind of that next adaptive management update to the plan, probably in 2026-ish or 2027, depending on how work plans go. To speak more specifically about our comprehensive plan, it really has three components: ecosystem stewardship, growth management, quality of life. Ecosystem stewardship is about protecting the natural resources that are really at the foundation of our economy, our community ethic. Growth management is about how we do that. That idea of if we can build in the right location and the right type, we can find the balance of all of our goals. And quality of life is the more human-facing part of the plan. Housing, transportation, how we continue to function as a community moving forward.
There's so much animation in this slide.
I didn't key my talking. This graphic is really at the core of that idea of amount, location, and type. And so what this graphic shows is that one of the core pieces of our plan as a community is that we're not looking to increase the overall amount of growth that's allowed. There are caps, there are limits. The whole idea is we're not going to increase the total amount that's allowed. We are instead going to shift the location from rural areas of natural resources into complete neighborhoods where there are There's already existing infrastructure where you can walk to jobs and restaurants and community facilities, etc. And so the regulations set up a series of tools that allow for density to be transferred from the rural areas into complete neighborhoods. And those tools are really focused on providing workforce housing. Because as we have grown, one of the biggest challenges we've faced is in maintaining a local workforce that lives and works locally. April was talking about a story the other day, a conversation she had with somebody who was talking about how, back when I was in elementary school a number of years ago, we didn't have any snow days, right? And somebody was like, oh, kids just need to be tougher these days. But it's not about the kids needing to be tougher. It's about the fact that when the majority, or not the majority, but when a significant portion of the school district workforce is commuting from Victor or Alpine and the pass or the canyon are closed, they can't get the teachers here to accept the kids at school. It's not that the kids can't get to school. It's not that we're doing anything different in terms of plowing roads, et cetera. And so that's why there's such a focus on the workforce living locally as a cornerstone of our quality of life and community character, so we can continue to function, because we are a geographically isolated community. So the idea here is you don't increase the amount, you just improve the location and type of development. And so in terms of how that's going, it's a little washed out, but since 2012, when we adopted this plan, 65% of new housing units have been built in complete neighborhoods, primarily in the town of Jackson, rather than in the rural areas where we have natural and scenic resources. So we've seen success there. Our goal was 60%, and so to be at 65% is success. In terms of the amount of growth, there's a lot here, and I won't go through all of it. But I think the important pieces here is that when you look at kind of the multifamily bars on this chart, which are a little washed out, but are the sort of orange ones up there, you can see that the type of housing that we're building is of a character that's going to be more affordable and really geared towards the workforce. And to reiterate that in terms of workforce type, you can see in terms of the protected housing, whether that's by deed restriction or some other requirement. Thank you, Ben. You can see some really significant growth there. You can also see in this chart a growth in second homes. That red line there is the growth in the number of vacant homes or second homes that we're seeing in the community, and that really gets into the challenges that we're facing in terms of housing affordability. And so,
Alex?
Yeah.
What's the pink line?
The pink line is the number of homes that are occupied by retirees, essentially, or anyone who is living here full-time, but not an active member of the workforce. And so we've seen a significant decline in that. Part of that has to do with the demographics. As I mentioned, a lot of our population growth as a community, how we got from 5,000 people to 24,000 people, is driven by in-migration of first the baby boomers, and then Gen X and millennials. So as those folks have gotten older and tried to raise a family here, we've seen them leave as they get to that retirement stage, and that's kind of the pink line. And so that leads into kind of what we see moving forward. This is a fairly wonky slide, and I won't go into all the different pieces, but a lot of times when people talk about population projection, they assume that population is going to be a compounding growth, right? Like, more people move here, they have babies, they have babies, they have babies, they have babies. Everything grows in a compound way. And that's represented by those two kind of dotted lines that fly off the top of the chart. In reality, our growth is plateaued. As you can see by kind of these actual growth numbers, the bigger dots there, we've sort of hit a plateau. And that plateau really follows not a compounding growth rate, but a declining growth rate, which is what we've seen. And so relative to the population that's already here, we're not seeing compounding growth, we're seeing a decline in growth rate. And if you follow that line out, it would actually project a decreasing population. And so there's a very interesting dynamic here in terms of how our community goes from here as kind of those original groups of folks who migrated here in their 20s and 30s start to age, as children who grew up here look to come back and find footing, what's going on there. And so one of the things that's really changed in terms of the community in the last 20 years is actually kind of the wealth and the money in the community. Not so much the physical development, not so much the population growth, but really the amount of money in the community. And what that's driven is increasing land prices. It's driven up wages as well, but a lot of the wealth growth is at the high end of the income spectrum. And so we see property values going up faster than kind of median income, what you can make as just as a working family in the community. We see wages at the high end going up, but wages in the middle going up less quickly. And what that means is that rents are starting to go up. That's this line here. Rents are starting to go up faster than median income. And so that really highlights a couple pieces. One, in terms of the population, we've seen a decreasing number of births to Teton County mothers. So not only is that initial wave of migration aging, but we're also not replacing the younger end of the demographic spectrum in the way that we used to. And it's harder for people to stick once they move here. Our generation talks about living the dream, the idea that you move here to ski for one season and you stay for a lifetime. That dream is becoming increasingly difficult to actualize in reality because of the lack or the price of housing and the instability of housing that young families face. And so that feels like a good transition to April to talk about housing some more, but I'd be happy to answer any questions once she gets done about any of these pieces.
Thanks, Alex. This is a really depressing chart, I think, at least in my world and the work that I do. We are seeing, I was just looking at rent rate numbers, a one-bedroom unit over at Latitude 43, which used to be Blair Place, is over $3,000 a month. I know when I moved here in 2004, I spent $500 on a room in a 3-bedroom, 2.5-bath house on Lilac Lane in Cottonwood. And that was 21 years ago almost. That home today would rent for $6,000 at least. It's about $2,000 a bedroom in a house like that. But it has a yard and a garage, so it's probably even more. But you think about have wages gone up that much? And the answer is absolutely not. We don't see that in the data. So our population is plateauing, and our resident workforce, so the percentage of the people who work here and live here locally, is holding steady-ish. I say ish because it's kind of going down. I mean, it's up and down, but our goal is 65%. We're at about 57, 58% right now. And we've been in that 57 to 60% range, sort of bouncing back and forth for the last several years. Our needs assessment that we did in 2022 told us that we need about 2,000 below market homes, so homes that are affordable to people working locally, earning their money locally, in the next handful of years. And that's being driven by job growth. I think we had 900 new jobs last year. A lot of those jobs were in the construction and property management industries, which tells me that they're probably helping folks with these giant homes in the county. They're certainly not in my house. And then we're also seeing our workforce is retiring. So, the needs assessment in 2022 said about 13% of our workforce was going to retire in the next handful of years. And so that's that pink line that we saw on Alex's earlier slide. You see people who retire and then they stay here for a little while. But a lot of folks, their home is their retirement. And so they sell, and I'll pick up my in-laws, Alex's parents. They moved here in the early 70s. They are a CPA and an engineer. They bought a lot in Skyline when it got platted. They built their own house. And when they sell that house, they're not going to sell it to a CPA and an engineer because it's, their neighbors just sold a home for $9 million. It's a completely different marketplace than it was in the 70s when they decided to stay here and to raise their family here. So as we see people retire and move away, they're not being replaced by local workers. They're being replaced by second homeowners or folks who want to live here because it's beautiful here. It's a wonderful community, and they're working remotely, and they're working in San Francisco or in Chicago or in New York. It's interesting if you ever fly out on a Monday morning, you see the commuters. There are a lot of folks that are flying going west. We've got direct flights to several large cities in the west. If you leave on a Sunday afternoon, you're going to catch the folks who are going east. And there's quite a few people that can manage that, and good for them. The good news is we have about 1,700 permanently protected homes for local workers and their families, and we think we're going to add 211 units to that count this year. So that's again, we're adding homes. This past year we added about 150 new permanently de-restricted homes for the workforce. That was the most we'd ever done in a year. So we are seeing success, but it is not keeping up. We think we added 150 homes. We also added 900 jobs. That is challenging. So we have our Workforce Housing Action Plan, and it tells us that we need to purchase land and partner with the private sector to build housing. And one of the reasons we do this, instead of having the housing authority as developer, which is what we used to do, is so we can spread out our resources. Instead of investing in one development every 3 or 4 years, we're able to invest in several developments at the same time. So last year, the housing department invested in 3 different developments, and 111 homes were built across those 3 developments. One was a partnership with Habitat at Parkside, which is a 3-phase project there. Jackson Street Apartments, which is downtown, 57 affordable homes to the south of the Brew Hub. And that was a partnership project with the Cumming Foundation and the Community Foundation of Jackson Hole. And then Flat Creek Apartments, which is on Snow King, sort of across the street from where the fairgrounds are. And that's 48 rental homes there. At Flat Creek Apartments, 99 people moved into that development. At Jackson Street Apartments, 120 people moved into that development. And over at Parkside, we had about 20 people move into the six homes that were built. So there are lots of, we are actually capturing families, which is great, and providing them with an opportunity for safe, stable, affordable housing. The Housing Action Plan also tells us to preserve existing homes, and we do this primarily by trying to provide down payment assistance to households who maybe have found, this is a Northeast 40 townhome in Rafter J that a family that was working here, they came to us and said, can you help us with down payment assistance? We said, sure. We are able to provide folks with up to 20% of the home's value, not to exceed $200,000, and then they put a permanent deed restriction on the home. So this house, they bought a few years ago. It was about $700,000. They actually sold this last year, and it was really interesting because there was another market rate home in the same development that was listed for sale at the same time that had not been upgraded like this one had, and it was listed for $1.4 million. So literally double what this one sold for, because this one had a deed restriction on it and had an appreciation cap on it to make it stay affordable for local workers and their families, versus the one that was sold around the corner at double price, likely not going to a local working family. And then planning for housing. So making sure, as Alex was talking about, amount, location, type, making sure that we are providing incentives for people to build affordable and workforce housing in the right location, in town really, where we have services, we've got grocery stores, we've got schools, we have jobs, so people can get around town a little bit easier. Our family lives in the Midtown neighborhood, right across the street from the library on Stacy Lane, best street in town, in my opinion. Deb and Peter Keenan live on our street too, and so does Ed Wigg. So we've got a strong PCGH representation, and we can walk everywhere, and it's great. We have new neighbors that just moved to the street last month, Haley and Nate Levinson, and their 3 children. And Haley said to me the other day, she said, I never knew how great it is to live right here. She's like, I can walk to the grocery store, I don't have to drive. And as a mother of 3, she's like, I can walk the dogs, I can go to the grocery store, grab something, come back. It's such a nice, it's a nice quality of life amenity. We've seen success since the Housing Action Plan was adopted. We've seen a significant increase in the number of homes created for local workers, 260% increase. We anticipate you're seeing sort of exponential growth there. We are sort of seeing that and anticipate that to continue as we move forward. Let's see, all the others are updated there. Yep. We've also had a great return on public investment. For those of you who are interested in numbers, we've invested about $40 million in local public funds. We've leveraged that money with about $115 million, and we've created 253 homes using those funds. That does not include 90 Virginia Lane, which is a really big project that I'll talk about in just a second that we're working on right now, but that is everything else today. What else? So our action plan tells us, again, build new affordable homes through partnership. Create programs to create and to protect existing homes, and that's really trying to meet several comprehensive plan goals. Again, protecting our community character through the built environment. So to the extent that we can save a house instead of tearing it down and building an apartment complex in its place, if that makes sense, we try to do that. Expanding our housing toolbox, which we're always looking at other places. We unfortunately are kind of on the bleeding edge of workforce and affordable housing tools, especially for a community our size, with our funding mechanisms. And then working with other partners in the community. I can't tell you the number of times I've met with your housing folks here working on your housing project. But it's great to see other folks in the community stepping up and into this space, recognizing this is just really, really important for our long-term success of our community. So we talk about building new affordable and workforce homes with partners. That's us, Town and County, via the Housing Department. We provide land, money, and expertise to nonprofit developers like the Housing Trust and Habitat for Humanity, to for-profit developers, and then to philanthropy and mission investors. Our conversations with PCGH folks have been, how can we help y'all make this project happen, right? How do we go from concept, this is beautiful, it's a gorgeous project, it makes sense, it's in the right location. What tools do we have in the Housing Department and the Housing Authority to help your pro forma work? And so thinking about how can we buy deed restrictions from you? So you already intend to protect the homes for the workforce in perpetuity. Let us pay you for that, and we can, and that's part of that programming that I was talking about earlier for affordable workforce housing. And here it is. So housing preservation programs. Oh, we also are working on senior housing and assisted living, and I talked to a couple of y'all in here about that as well. Let's see, looking ahead, we've got 90 Virginia Lane. This is a rendering of 90 Virginia Lane. 226 homes for local workers and their families in the heart of Midtown. So I can basically see this site from my house. And right now we anticipate breaking ground next spring, summer. And then Northern South Park that Alex hit on earlier. Northern South Park is probably a 30-year development. I mean, if you think about it, Cottonwood is still, there's still lots in Cottonwood, and Cottonwood was platted in, what year? 1978. Northern South Park is a big neighborhood, and I would be surprised to see that the entire thing built out in the next, it'll be in a generation. I mean, it's going to take a while. And that is because the market cannot absorb all of those market rate homes at a price point that I think is attractive for developers. And the affordable workforce homes, there's a significant amount of money that needs to be raised to get those homes built. To give you an idea, at 90 Virginia Lane, which is an infill site that has water, sewer, electric already, so not a greenfield site like Northern South Park, that development is going to be a $230 million development when it's all said and done. That's significant. And when you think about our nonprofit partners down in Northern South Park, they're just going to have to raise a lot of money. And I'm certain that they will be able to, but it's not going to happen overnight. And so again, when I think about what's the pipeline of housing look like, Northern South Park is a slow burn, right? Like we're going to have units coming online over time, but they aren't all going to hit at the same time. Certainly not those deed restricted homes there. Let's see. Oh, that's the last slide. We're working with Habitat over at Parkside, and they are building 18 homes there in about 4 years. So if you think about that timing, when you think about Northern South Park, it's just going to be, again, it's great, and we're so excited for the units to come online, but it's going to take some time. Maybe they'll be ready for our kids when they want to move back. We have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old. Ben asked me to sort of hit on the PCJH development and how that sort of fits in here. Again, right now we have about 58% of our workforce living locally. When you think about rent rates and the direction in which they are going, which is up, and you think about home prices also going up, it is really, really hard for any business, let alone a church or a nonprofit, to pay a market wage that can, that can afford to pay $3,000 for a one-bedroom home, right? And so when you think about the community benefits that come from having people staff Little Lamps, having people staff your summer programming here, I can tell you as a parent, it is really, really hard to have kids in this town. When you look at cost of living, which we oftentimes are looking at, people without children, it's hard for them. But then when you add one kid, all of a sudden it becomes basically impossible unless you can find affordable childcare. I think we're double, I'm looking at Alex here, but I think our cost for childcare is about double the national average. And I feel that as a parent. Alex and I were part of a parent cohort that actually started our own daycare because we couldn't get into affordable daycare. At one point, we were spending hours at a time in this co-op. We were all certified through DFS to take care of 0 to 2-year-old children. And that's how we made it work. But we have the flexibility in our jobs to do that. Not everybody has that. And so thinking about, childcare certainly, and I do think about, the benefits here at PCJH, you're able to provide some of that to our community in a loving and safe environment. But it is so hard if you can't provide housing for folks who are going to be doing that work, unless you're going to charge an exorbitant fee, and then all of a sudden, who's actually coming to the daycare or to camp? So I think that is, I'm really excited that that's something that the church has decided to invest in. And then I think about the opportunity to extend potentially, access to those homes to other important organizations and businesses in town. And think about partnerships through Human Services Council, or even thinking about the hospital or whatnot, the school district. Making sure that we, again, are providing safe, stable, affordable housing to the people who make our community run. Because if they aren't here, what kind of community is it, right? It's the old adage that, like, as Alex said, the living the dream thing, but also when you ask people, like, why did you move to Jackson? And a lot of times they say, like, oh, the mountains, or, the climbing, or the boating. And then you ask them why they stayed, and they're like, well, I stayed because the people are great. I love the people. I love going to the post office and saying hey to folks, and going to the grocery store and just running into my neighbors. But as we start to see our population decline, the people who actually work here and are and able to live here, that decline. Those folks are working here during the day and going over to Victor or Driggs or Teutonia or Pocatello, or they're going down to Alpine or Etna. And they're investing in their community down there. They're volunteering as a youth sports coach or as a dance teacher or a church in their own community, not here. And I feel that loss, and I think so many other people do too. So I think it's really important as we think about, again, sort of the pipeline and the spectrum of housing, that we have not only the town and county, the government certainly sort of stepping into that role, but also the private sector stepping up into that role and providing different types of housing, not just apartments or condominiums, but providing, opportunities for maybe a larger family or so to join in and have access to a home. Yeah, question.
Yeah, we're from Colorado, where this discussion is frequent as well, like Aspen and Vail and Steamboat and things like that. And I think Colorado is probably a half a generation or a generation ahead of Jackson on this. So I'm wondering, are we talking to those folks and figuring out what mistakes they've made and said, what do we not want to do? And I ask that because we were just near Aspen last fall, and I used to go to Aspen in the 60s when it was this cute little funky little mountain community. And now at rush hour, it is a super highway out of Aspen down to the outlying communities as all the workforce leaves. I mean, 4 lanes,
I know.
all going one way. And I just thought,
service too.
nothing fails like success.
Yeah.
And so are we learning from those guys? Are we talking to them and seeing what we can avoid, since they're a little ahead of us on that?
Yes, we talked to all of our sort of cohorts across the Intermountain West. Aspen's interesting. They have the Aspen Housing Authority. They've got what the town of Aspen has done, and then now what the county is doing as well. They're not simpatico. I actually talked to the folks in the county with some frequency down there. And they had significant success in their housing program. They have a lot of deed-restricted housing units there, and their sort of first and second generation of folks in those houses have been able to retire there and able to stay. But their land development outside of their affordable and workforce housing program, they really said, we're going to actually depend on Rifle, and we're going to depend on the folks down the valley because we have a highway. We don't have a highway here. We're actually more similar to a place like Key West than we are some of those Colorado towns that have access. And it's really easy, right? When you are a family, you say, okay, I can get into this kind of small, modest, affordable home and stay here in Aspen, or I can go, 20, 30 minutes down the road and I can have a nice big house with a big yard and maybe an animal, or, a horse or something. And a lot of folks opted for that. And you see then what happens is those communities become their own community. And we've seen this in Victor and Driggs too. And so then all of a sudden you go from 2 people maybe in the household working in Aspen or working in Jackson, coming over the hill, to maybe one person's coming over here and one person's actually staying in their home community, and they have a job there, because as those communities build up and develop, they have their own economies. And then 10 years down the road, the family that was able to afford to live in Victor or Driggs, we'll use our example, they're now going to Teutonia because it's too expensive to live in Victor and Driggs. And we've seen that, we've seen that in Colorado. We're seeing it here, and I think there's a lot of talk about that in the 2012 comprehensive plan update, even in the 2020 comprehensive plan update. And I remember these conversations in 2012 where we talked about, well, when Victor and Driggs have their own community, and it's cool to live over there, and they have amenities and resources, then what happens? And the answer was, well, then we're going to be pulling people from farther away, and we are seeing that now.
So what are the things we can do differently than we've seen in these other communities? What have we learned from them?
Yeah, well, I'd say a couple of things. One is we do have a growth cap, which I think is important. And we have said we are going to incentivize permanently deed-restricted homes here in the Valley. That is something that again, whether, and I know there's some controversy around density and all of that, but I do think that we have made some policy decisions that have said we're going to prioritize above everything else, really, affordable workforce housing. We don't have quite as much commercial space as some of these other places, but I think what's challenging, we're looking at some of the data recently, is that COVID has really upended a lot of this. And so we're a few years past the COVID, the 2019, 2020, 2021, trying to see what sort of happened economically from that. And again, a lot of people can work remotely. there are a lot of industries in town that don't need commercial space, and that's new too. In that they are either a wildlife tour operator, or maybe they are doing lawn care or something where they have a truck, right? But they don't have an office space. And so trying to, I think, to wrangle the economic development piece is challenging, and I don't think we have not done that yet. And I don't know, I'd say that's something that all of these communities have been challenged by. The other issue is, we have a bit of a regressive tax structure in Wyoming, and it is a very desirable place for very wealthy people to be. And I don't know, locally we cannot change that policy piece of it, so, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Other questions? Yeah.
So I see a big difference between 90 Virginia Lane and Northern South Park. Are they lumped in the same category?
Yes, in a couple different ways, so let me explain that. 90 Virginia Lane is housing for people sort of making it the broad spectrum, so everything from workforce down to low income, lower income households. Northern South Park will be the densest neighborhood in Jackson once it's built out. So there, it's a very dense neighborhood. There are pockets of Northern South Park that will be denser than 90 Virginia Lane. Mostly on the affordable workforce housing side. So they are similar in that way. They're different developers building. And I think a lot of what will be built in Northern South Park will be ownership. Okay. Hey, Roby.
I'm sorry if you covered this, but if you, based on our comp plan goal, and you mentioned today that we're at 57, 58% housed locally. If you took everything that's being built on the street, everything that's in the pipeline, including PCJH, or most of the time, where does that get us on that percentage?
What's our job growth rate during that same period of time?
My question first, then yours.
My question informs the answer to your question. Yeah, I mean, I can't give you the answer to that because I don't think we know. Because of job growth, that job growth piece is important, and obviously is directly correlated to the percent of the resident workforce. I don't know, Alex, if you have a better answer to that because this is sort of the lane that you're in mostly, but. Yeah, I'd say, I don't know. I mean, I couldn't tell you. We have, again, been building significantly more than we've ever built. 260% increase, right, in the last several years. And we're sort of barely hanging on. And my sense is that it's because it's being driven, a lot of it's being driven by retirement. And folks who are leaving the workforce, may not be leaving the valley yet, but they're leaving the workforce. And it's that the baby boomers. We saw a chart earlier where Alex was showing, when the baby boomers moved here in the 70s, and then you had another boom in the 90s. A lot of the folks that moved here in the 70s are retiring, and so some of them are staying in their homes. Others are selling their homes, but they're not selling them to local workers. And so that leakage is really challenging, and we're trying to keep up with that leakage. In the best way possible, but it's depending on job growth. I mean, I think we can probably keep up with the leakage on the development side, but if we're going to continue to grow jobs at 3-4% a year, that starts to get pretty tough.
Yeah, I get it. It seems to me though, at 2019 we were at 69, 70%.
Absolutely not, Roby.
No?
No.
No, 59. I'm sorry.
We were at 59.
Yeah, now we're at 57.
57, 58 now.
Going the wrong way, in spite of building.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd say again, likely because of two things. One, retirements, and two, job growth. Both of those work against you. Yeah.
I see that there was a mention of senior living and assisted living, and I'm wondering is that being addressed in any way?
Great question. So you'll remember there was a SPET item a couple of years ago for an assisted living project. And I believe it received $1.9 million. And that group is continuing to work on that piece of it. We at the housing department were directed by the elected officials last year to start to add in senior housing, assisted living into our work plan. Over at Virginia Lane, 90 Virginia Lane, 10% of those units will be for senior households. Not senior households that need assisted living, but senior households who can live independently. And so we're trying to start incorporating that. You know, there's this idea of blue zones, these super healthy, the healthiest places in the world, right, where you have more centenarians than anywhere else. One of the markers of those communities is that you have multiple generations living together. You don't just have all the old folks by themselves over here and all the young people over here, but you have, you know, grandkids with grandparents. You've got, you know, every age in between, and it keeps everyone young. The old folks young, and then you know, it's a loving, caring community for young people, and then you have, you know, help and support for the sandwich generation, whatever generation that is at the time, who's got young kids and older parents. And so that's sort of the idea, I think, for the housing department's work, is to really focus in on that independent but senior living options, and then trying to support the folks who are working on the assisted living, which really is a very specialized, different type of programming. And so that's what we're doing right now. We met with assisted living folks this past week and trying to help them brainstorm some spots for an assisted living center.
Yeah, we're here working with the Classical Academy down in South Park, and you can be sure I'm not exaggerating when I say this is a daily topic down there. So one of the questions that comes up is there public housing assistance for, you know, people who work in private schools or private industry, and we don't know. How does that work? How does public housing assistance work for people in just moving in and trying to live here?
Yeah, good question. So our program, we have a weighted drawing process for our program, and it's very, very transparent. The requirements are that you have to have at least one person in your household that works full-time locally. That's 30 hours a week on average across the year. And then for our affordable program, which is an income and asset restricted program, your household has to earn within the income range. So we have 4 income ranges: less than 50% of median income, 50 to 80% of median income, 80 to 120% median income, and then 120 to 160% of median income. Okay, so if you're in a capital A affordable, one person has to work full-time locally, you have to earn most of your money, or not, you have to earn within the income range, and you're not allowed to own residential real estate within 75 miles of Jackson. We then have a workforce program, and the workforce program requires at least one person to work full-time locally, and then it requires your household to earn 75% of your income locally. Essentially, that's sort of boxing out remote workers. So if you have a family that has one person who's working full-time locally, the other person who's maybe not, and they, you know, make equal amounts of money, they would not qualify for local, or for our program at least. So for folks at the Classical Academy or any other, you know, private nonprofit or the church or a business, as long as you've worked here for 1 year, we require that you have a year's worth of work under your belt. You can apply to weighted drawing, and you get 1 entry into the weighted drawing for every year you've worked full-time locally consecutively up to 10. And then you get extra entries up to 2 for each critical service provider you have in your household. So Alex and I have lived here. We would have 10 years for you know, the maximum amount for years worked locally, and then Alex is on the search and rescue team, so we would get 1 extra entry. So we would get 11 as a household. But that's how it works. And so then people enter drawings. Right now we have 2 drawings going, drawing entry periods. We have 1 for a 1-bedroom apartment over at Jackson Street Apartments. We have 53 households who have applied for that. And we have another for a 2-bed, 2-bath Westview townhome ownership opportunity workforce. We have 83 households that have applied for that. So lots of demand. Our last drawing, though, we had somebody who was chosen on her first try ever entering the drawing, teacher from the middle school.
So the assistance is actually for a place to live rather than funds to help you pay for where you are living?
Yeah, we do not provide rental assistance that
Okay,
way.
all right.
Yeah, the state used to have a rental assistance program. Again, kind of came out of the COVID. It's called ERAP, and 122 Resource Center was the local organization that could disperse those. They still provide rental assistance for households. So if somebody finds themselves, they've lost their job or they had a big medical bill or something and they need help, you can go to 122 Resource Center and apply through their programs. They're not forever, but they are temporary assistance. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
April, I'm just curious, do you all have counselors there that help people work through their income requirements and all of that, and whether or not they're eligible?
We do. So we have two folks on our team who will sit down with people and go through all of their, one person who speaks Spanish and is a native Spanish speaker, and one person who is a native English speaker, but we'll sit down and go through folks, their tax returns, their even if they want, their bank statements. I mean, it's wild to think about how incomes the way you derive your income has changed over time. It used to be you had a W-2, you do tax returns, done. Now it's like, can we see your Venmo account? What was the side job you did, your side hustle from 3 months ago? Like, how are you paid there? It is way more complicated. But we have folks, and our office is very busy with people just coming in and saying, help me figure this out. I think that this is what I earned, but I'm not sure, or I don't remember, or I don't have a lot of hours for all of these random jobs I've worked. And so helping them, we have templates for people. We say, okay, here's the template, fill this out, and then they go away and do that and come back. Yeah.
What happens if someone exceeds the thresholds for the affordable housing when they're living there?
Yeah, okay, good question. So the question was, what happens if somebody's living in an affordable home and then, let's say they're living in a home that's for the 80 to 120% median income range, and they then make 140% of median income over time. They can still stay there. In the affordable program, we check in with you annually. If you bought your home since 2018, we check in with you annually to make sure that you're still working full-time locally and you're still living in your home. But if you earn more than the income range, you can still stay there. We actually aren't checking, we check the income, but that is not a reason that you would be asked to leave your home. We do have a very robust compliance program. We did compliance on 1,043 home units last year. And we had 1 forced eviction, 2 forced non-renewals of leases, 1 forced sale. So we are sort of checking in with people. That's like the most unpleasant part of our job. And it's also really important because, people, I think over time, people have come to realize that we are doing compliance and that they have to follow the rules. And that's good for our community, I think, in the long run. Evan?
How would you answer this question? I feel like I've heard this question come up a few times in our congregation of like, hey, why is the church building, or should the church build this housing project that we're proposing when there's so many other things coming online, in the pipeline for, other units being built? Like, why should the church still do this?
Well, thank you. First of all, for stepping in and being willing to do it. We have 1,500 households looking for housing through our program alone. It represents 3,500 people. We don't have 1,500 units in the pipeline. We are not going to be able alone to solve the problem. This is a community issue, and having the church step in to help provide not only housing for your own employees, but then for others is tremendous. And we see other employers doing some of this too, whether it's housing just for their employees. I mean, if you go over off of Powderhorn, you see Jackson Hole Mountain Resorts, employee housing there that they built. A lot of employers had to step into this space to ensure that they're able to stay open and continue to provide their services for the community. I'd make a strong argument that having PCJH here for generations to come is good for our community, especially the programs that the church is able to provide, and then being able to leverage this amazing opportunity and resource that the church has in the land and to create other housing for other really important critical workers in the valley is good for our community and really speaks to, I think, the church's ethic around supporting the community and loving the community, and so I think it's great.
And Ben, I would just say it goes back to Roby's question as well. Like all these units in the pipeline, all the success that we've had in the past 5 to 10 years of adding workforce housing to this community has only kept us at level versus the external forces around job growth, retirement, the demographics of how we grew up as a community in the 70s and 80s. And so while there's a lot of great work going on in order to address those demographic and socioeconomic concerns, there's not a number of units that is like the answer and will be done. This is an ongoing thing that needs to continue to be addressed, whether it's by PCJH or the hospital's building housing now as well. There's any number of employees who are working on it, employers who are working on it in the same way that you are. And so unfortunately there's not a point at which this effort is done, and it's going to require all the efforts moving forward just to kind of hold steady with where we are right now.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Got any more information on our project that you would like to share with us?
Do I have more information on your project that you want me to share with you?
This church project.
That sounds like something maybe somebody else should address. It's beautiful. I'd be happy to pass the mic to somebody else who wants to sort of address that question.
You can ask me later, but that's fine. I did have a question for you. Well, first of all, I wanted to say to you both, thanks for coming here. This is really helpful to understand, where we sit in terms of relationship to the community. It always feels like, in some ways I kind of wish we didn't have to do this, but what you're saying is we all have to do this. All employers need to figure out how to do this, because, and my view has always been, if we don't do this, we're not going to have a staff. And, as much as I love Ben and Tammy, we're not going to have a church with just 2 pastors. So it's the whole staff really is needed. I guess my question for you guys is, are there things going on in the state legislature that is either making your job easier or is making it harder? Yeah. And are there things that's going to make it harder for us to kind of in Teton County to do this?
That's a great question. Short answer is yes, there's some challenging policy discussions happening at the state level.
Okay.
Around whether it's around property taxes, and property taxes fund local government. And so I think that's a level of service discussion for our local elected officials. I think that certainly a tax on the housing exaction program that's going to do 2 things. One, it's going to take money from the housing program, but 2, it's going to make it even easier to develop either very large residential homes or commercial in the valley, which are driving job growth. So sort of leading us in the other direction. What else at the state, Alex?
I mean, I think the other piece you touched on, which is in no way new to the current state legislature, is just Wyoming's low tax in general policy, which has been around forever, and to April's point earlier, really attracts people who have a lot of money, maybe aren't as committed to the community necessarily, and driving the price of land and everything up. And so at the kind of that macro level, the low tax incentive when we get at housing issues related to wealth disparity, it's not a new hurdle by any means, but we really saw it grow into a major issue beginning in about 2005.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, April and Alex. Thanks for all you do in the community with housing and search and rescue and coaching the Emily soccer team. And just really appreciate you guys being here today and talking. So. Anyway, you were dismissed. Some of you down in worship.